Hi, this is Eric Martin with Board Game Geek. I'm here with Duncan Malloy from Osprey Games. We're going to be looking at They Come Unseen by Commander Andy Benford, which is being demoed here, Gen Con 2015. It's out later in the year.
It's due out at the end of October, so we'll have a pre-release at Spiel this year, and then a full release to launch, I think, the last week in October.
I know this is a 2-player asymmetric game, and it's hoping
2 to 5 player.
2 to 5 player. I did not know that. News to me. Hoping you can give an overview of how to play.
Absolutely. So, the core of the game, there's either 2 players or 2 teams. You've got a set of Nato players who are operating submarines, who are playing kind of a hidden movement and a bluffing game. They're pre-nuclear submarines, so they're operating on batteries and a diesel engine.
Okay.
What will happen is there's no limit to how long they can stay hidden from the Soviet team, but there is a limit to how far they can move before they have to pop up, recharge their batteries, and drop below the surface again.
Okay.
So this team, who are operating on the deep board, which is going to be hidden behind the game screen, hidden from view, will be moving...
Which doesn't help for a demo, but we'll pretend.
These submarines will be moving a given distance, so in shallow water they're only allowed to move up to 6 spaces, whereas in deeper water they can move up to 14 spaces. What the Soviet players are trying to do is protect their 6 ice stations from attack by the submarines by trying to use their knowledge of where the submarines last surfaced, what depth of water they're in, and how much fuel they think they have left to try and triangulate where they are, move to this area, and conduct a sonar search. Once the sonar search takes place, then the submarine players, if they're within one of these colored areas, will declare, for example, contact red, and the Soviet players can bomb 6 of these 9 squares if they've found contact in this area, or 6 of these 12 squares if they've found contact in this area.
Okay.
They also set a depth at which those charges go off. So if you score a direct hit on a submarine, it takes 1 damage, which affects its future operating depth, and it has up to 3 hits before it's sunk. The objective for the Soviets is to take out these subs. The objective for NATO is to take out 4 of these 6 ice stations, which will be decided at random by card draw at the start of the game. But the Soviets don't necessarily know which ports are vulnerable to attack.
Right.
The Soviets also have a second resource management game undergoing, whereby they have to keep track of the amount of salvos of bombs they've used and the amount of fuel they have remaining, which is based on how far they've traveled. And in order to replenish these, they have to move to one of the ports that has some of these tokens in them and spend them in order to, in turn, be able to go out and hunt more effectively. But any time a harbour is attacked, anything that's stored at that harbour is completely destroyed. So while the Soviets are trying to track down the subs and operating as the cat rather than the mouse, they're also trying to do their best to hide the cheese and making sure that no one harbour provides too vulnerable a target for themselves.
Okay. So how does it differ with 2 players versus more with the 2 teams?
With 2 players, both players take control of 2 destroyers and 2 submarines each, and there's just a little more to keep track of. Each submarine and each destroyer has a dedicated control panel to keep track of their own fuel, whereas with 4 players, players will operate in teams. So 1 player each will take a submarine, and 1 player each will take a destroyer.
Okay.
With a 5th player, players can take control of the logistics fleet for the Soviets and can manage their resources while the other 2 players go out and hunt. It works perfectly well with 5, but it is very, very satisfying with 4. Okay. Particularly satisfying. So it's nice. It's a mixture of hidden movement and resource management. Feels really, really tense because unlike most war-themed games, both players feel extremely vulnerable. And that immediately brings a really, really pleasing tension right from the first couple of turns of the game. It plays in an average of about 90 minutes. Can be as quick as an hour if players are either particularly lucky or particularly reckless. And can go up to as much as 2, maybe 2 hours 20.
Okay. Now, I know the designer was a member of the British Navy.
Absolutely.
Here. How did this come to you? Or how did it come about?
The story behind the game is fantastic. So,
I mean, you don't have a history of games. Osprey, it's sort of a new venture for you.
I've been hired as the kind of lead editorial, I suppose you would describe it as, for Osprey's board and card games line. So Osprey has great tradition of war games, and subsequently we've been moving into board and card game lines because we already have that.
That's my ignorance of war games coming through.
No worries at all. No worries at all. But my personal preference is for board games. So everything that's coming from Osprey, some of it will have a military feel like this, but more of it will have a totally different feel. We've got something like The King is Dead, which is an area control Euro. We've got Secret Santa, which is a very, very light, frothy card game. And we've got a bunch of new titles coming in 2016 that we're not quite ready to talk about yet, but we've got at least 8 games coming in 2016. For the history of this, though, Commander Benford, during the Cold War, obviously, everybody was on active duty nearly all the time, but fortunately, most of the time they had nothing to do. So this game was originally designed in the 70s and was played on an aluminium board that was mounted to one of their tables. And they played with magnetic pieces. So Royal Navy commanders, ship commanders and sub-commanders would play this against each other while at sea as their rec time. And it has never been produced. So got put in touch with Andy through UK Games Expo last year, and he sent me the rules, and it was about 46 pages of rules, and I was a bit nervous about it. But over time I realized that the problem wasn't that he didn't know how to design a really good game, the problem was that he didn't know how to write a rule book.
Right.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful game. It's tense, it's succinct. We've got a 16-page rule book, including rule variants and optional rules, and then we've got a 16-page history book where Andy talks about the kind of history of the game, his history at sea, and also naval strategy as it applies to the game. So it's a really nice game. It can work with different levels of abilities as well. I think there is a lot of strategy to bluffing as the NATO players, but that particular side could work particularly well as a family game with the younger players, allowing them to take the bluff while maybe adults will take the more thinky resource management elements, but it is particularly satisfying.
All right. Thanks very much for the overview, Duncan.
No worries at all. No worries at all.